Support for this program is provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation of Jennings. The Ziegler Museum is a cultural center for Southwest Louisiana, featuring European and American art and wildlife dioramas. Additional support provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Hi everyone, I'm Andre Morrow. Right now on the state we're in, what the governor calls an epic failure. State lawmakers are forced into a special session after they strike out on a budget deal. What it means to you. And an aversion to diversion where the forever incomplete Comite River project stands. But first, some of the stories making headlines across our state. The most violent day of 2017 in New Orleans, Saturday, June 3rd, now has that dubious claim. 13 people were shot in 5 separate incidents at the Mid-City Events Center, AP Turo Avenue, South Liberty and Upper Line Streets, and the Pines Village neighborhood that's in New Orleans East. 2 of the 13 victims died as a result of the shootings, including 21-year-old Zachary Nelson, a former kicker for the St. Augustine High football team. Before this past Saturday, the Big Uneasy's most violent day of the year was back on February 10th when shootings injured 6 people and claimed the lives of 2. NOPD reports an average of 2 people a day killed or wounded by gunfire in New Orleans this year. Also making headlines, one of the 2 BP supervisors who faced prosecution following the 2010 catastrophic explosion of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig died at his home in Baton Rouge. Donald Vadrine was 69. He lived in Lafayette most of his life. Vadrine was the night rig supervisor when the explosion became one of the worst environmental calamities in American history. The explosion killed 11 people, began leaking millions of gallons of crude into the Gulf of Mexico, and badly damaged the reputation of BP oil. Prosecutors accused Vadrine and another rig supervisor of botching a critical pressure test that could have prevented the spill. But Vadrine escaped manslaughter charges after testifying against his co-defendant, who was eventually acquitted. In 2015, Vadrine pled guilty to a misdemeanor pollution charge, and he served 10 months probation. Tuesday, June 6th, marked the 73rd anniversary of D-Day, the daring assault on the beaches of Normandy, France, that culminated in the Allied liberation of Western Europe during World War II. That battle and countless other American victories would not have been possible without New Orleans shipbuilder Andrew Higgins. Higgins pioneered the construction of a unique flat-bottom landing boat to explore Louisiana's bayous, and his boats caught the attention of the U.S. military, which used them in water invasions throughout the war. Higgins's revolutionary design shaped the Allies' strategy, and Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower deemed him the man who won the war. Now, the month also of June kicked off hurricane season in Louisiana, and the State Department of Children and Family Services wants people to pre-register for disaster food stamps. The Disaster Assistance Program, known as DSNAP, covers those who don't regularly receive food stamps and who need help buying groceries in the wake of a storm. You can check out the 2 websites on your screen right now. That's where you can pre-register for DSNAP benefits. Since the program began 8 years ago, more than 600,000 Louisiana families have signed up. 2 months of regular session, countless hours of public testimony, a week of backroom negotiations, and still, Louisiana lawmakers could not agree on a state budget by deadline on Thursday, plunging the legislature into overtime at the taxpayers' expense. Quint Forget explains.
This wasn't supposed to happen. As they entered the final week of Louisiana's legislative session, Capitol lawmakers were sure they could come to a compromise on the state's $28 billion budget. Instead, the Senate and House representatives failed to reach a deal by Thursday's 6 p.m. deadline, triggering a special session 30 minutes later that restarted the state's budgeting process. That special session must end by June 19th. Final negotiations began 4 days ago. House Appropriations Chairman Cameron Henry asked representatives to vote down amendments the Senate made to his House Bill 1. That's the document that outlines Louisiana's operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year.
So members, I would ask you in supporting me in rejecting the Senate amendments. Thank you.
The Senate's proposed budget would have given pay raises to 38,000 state employees and allocated all of the state's projected revenue. But Henry and other House GOP leaders preferred a plan that set aside at least $100 million in case income forecasts came up short. By Thursday evening, the chambers weren't able to reconcile their differences, with each side blaming the other for failing to meet in the middle.
The Senate seems to be stuck on 100%, and that's their prerogative. I don't think that's in the best interest of anyone in this room, anyone in that room, or roughly the 4.5 million people that we represent. I don't know much more I can do to prevent us having to come back here. I have absolutely no desire to be here at 6:30 tonight.
In a news conference following adjournment, Governor Edwards insisted he would keep lawmakers in Baton Rouge as long as necessary to broker a deal. Edwards, a supporter of the Senate budget plan, blamed the end of the session on a failure in leadership by House Republicans.
The House leadership clearly chose to put party politics ahead of the people's business, over the needs of the people of Louisiana. As a result, a budget agreement was not met, and we're now headed into an unnecessary and costly special session where the options before them won't be any different than they were this time.
Lawmakers this session not only failed to approve an operating budget for the state, they have yet to tackle an even greater challenge. It's a fiscal cliff of more than $1 billion in temporary taxes that will expire on July 1st, 2018. On Monday, Franklin Democrat Sam Jones vented many lawmakers' frustrations that the legislature declined to address this looming shortfall.
We had the opportunity here to finally fix it, and we did not do it. All of the instruments, all of the tools, all of the bills that could possibly fix the fiscal cliff for next year are gone.
Governor Edwards has already announced plans for another special session as early as fall of this year. Its agenda will include tax reform and other measures to keep the state from falling off the fiscal cliff.
And it's really time for us to do something. We haven't done anything but argue about things, about statutes and this and that and everything else. We haven't done anything for the proper operation of this state. The people deserve better than this. They deserve better than what right now seems to be one of the most massive failures we've ever had.
Though this session was marked by fiscal inaction, it will likely be remembered for an unexpected bipartisan embrace of criminal justice reform. Lawmakers approved all 10 bills in a sweeping package of reform legislation backed by Governor Edwards. The measures are aimed at lessening penalties, restructuring sentencing, and curtailing Louisiana's highest in the world incarceration rate. On Monday, lawmakers in the House cleared the cornerstone of the reform package, including its most contentious component, Senate Bill 139 by Metairie Republican Danny Martini. Martini's bill expands parole and probation opportunities for offenders. Tanner McGee, a Republican from Houma who helped lead crime reform efforts in the House, rallied the measure before state representatives.
We have the district attorneys on board. We have the sheriffs on board. We have the victims on board. We have everybody on board. It's time to send the message that this is Louisiana and it's a new day. We do things differently now. We're open for business and we're going to do things better than we did it before.
The reform bills are expected to reduce Louisiana's prison population by 10% over the next decade and save the state more than $260 million. 70% of those funds will go toward programs to reduce crime, curb recidivism, and help victims.
Gwen Forgey, thank you very much for that report. And if you look at what the governor hoped to achieve when the session started, to all the things on his list that ultimately are unfulfilled at this point, you see the list is long, and where we are is a familiar place. Joining me to talk about what happens at the Capitol, or perhaps what doesn't happen, Julie O'Donoghue from NOLA.com, Times-Picayune, and Melinda DeLotte from the Associated Press. Your thoughts, first off the bat?
Well, I think everybody knew it was going to be a tough session when they went into it. They knew they were going to have very difficult financial decisions to make, and at the end of the day, they just kind of punted on all of it.
But you can't remain in a punting mode forever. You've got to go on the offensive at some point.
Correct. Well, I mean, at some point they're actually going to, I mean, they will be coming back into session.
Right.
And they will at least be attempting to do a budget.
And you'll get to be covering it. Correct? You excited about that?
Sure.
Sure. Any surprises?
I think the ease with which the criminal justice stuff got done, was somewhat surprising. We had a lot of opposition from the DAs in the beginning, but once they got a fair amount of what they wanted taken out of the package, there wasn't as much opposition, and it still should, if it lives up to its promises, do a fair amount in terms of reducing the prison population. It's not saving nearly as much money as I think some would like. I mean, when you look at actual savings, you're only looking at $7 or $8 million a year on average over 10 years. So it's not going to make a huge dent in our fiscal problems. But I was expecting right up to the end for there to be a little bit more pushback on some of it than there was.
When someone says, all right, well, Louisiana, I told you so, is that a cynic or is that a realist saying that?
Well, I think that people need to understand that there are very strong philosophical disagreements between Republicans in the House and Democrats in the House, and then the House leadership, who are Republicans, and the Senate leadership, who are also Republicans in a lot of places, but they aren't necessarily as conservative philosophically. So getting anything through that is a big accomplishment on the financial front, whether it be the budget or spending practices or taxes, is going to be very difficult to do.
If you look at Washington right now, it seems to me that Louisiana has become sort of a mirror image of the inactivity, the inaction, a lot of activity, but not a lot of action.
Well, I think you do see more partisan disputes than you used to once upon a time in the chambers, and particularly in the House. There's just a much larger partisan divide between the Democrats and the Republicans on where they stand on a lot of things.
It can't stay like that forever. If things have to happen ultimately, what do we do?
Right. I mean, I think a big difference to remember between what happens in D.C. and what happens in Louisiana and state government is that in D.C. they can run a deficit. So there are differences. There's more of like, the chickens coming home to roost on fiscal issues in a state government. You have to balance the budget, and you can't be, borrowing money or printing money to do that necessarily. So the states,
that's a huge difference, right?
The stakes are kind of different. Yeah.
We know what happens nationally.
That is why I think nationally there are a lot of people who can be anti-tax for decades and kind of stick to that ideological bent. That's much harder to do in state government. You eventually at some point have to cut or raise money, and I guess we'll just see what they do. They haven't shown. I mean, we talk a lot about how they didn't want to renew taxes or raise taxes, but I have not seen a lot of serious proposals for cutting $1 billion out of this budget either. So I don't. At some point they're going to have to do something. We'll just see what it is.
Brief thoughts about a crystal ball as we look at the special session.
Well, I spoke with the House Speaker just yesterday, and he said he thought that the same problems they have in negotiating a deal, they don't go away just because they started a new session. They have a weekend off, and then they all go back to work, and they still fundamentally disagree with each other about what should happen in a budget deal.
All right. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think we're going to have a side issue about the House leadership, because there was a vote at in the last few minutes of the session that indicated that maybe, not certain, the majority of House members might have been willing to go along with the Senate budget. Now, will those people come back and feel that way? I don't know. You can't say that, but I think there'll be some talk about was there a divide between what the body wanted, not just the Democrats, but actually enough people in the body to get the Senate proposal through at the end of session, and what leadership wanted, and whether that means someone really makes a go at changing the leadership or not.
Julie, Melinda, we appreciate that you will be there to cover it, and we'll be watching what you have to say and write about. Thanks so much for joining us right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Legislators did not address changes to the tax code, of course, either this session, with lawmakers in Acadiana seeming to be especially reluctant. No surprise, they pointed to oil trying to rebound after a low point 2 years ago. Kelly Spires talked with the head of one company about how oil and gas impact our state's bottom line.
This is the work floor at a company in Acadiana that manufactures parts for oil rigs. It's noisy and bustling, productive. At the same time in 2015, though, it was a lot more quiet.
A lot of the orders that had been placed at the end of 2014 Early 15, we were getting those out of the door and we weren't seeing those orders coming back in. And so then, unfortunately, we had to start letting some people go. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. So my name is Quay McKnight. I'm the president and chairman of M&M International in Broussard, Louisiana. We're a family-owned and operated company. We manufacture well control valves that we build right here in Broussard for the oil and gas drilling industry.
And with the drop in oil prices, so fell the number of rigs in the Gulf. And with that, the need for parts M&M International makes.
There was a dramatic reduction in rigs from close to 2,000 rigs down to 415 or so was the lowest. So, that type of reduction caused a serious reduction in revenues in our sector.
This affected companies across Acadiana. Greg Upton is an LSU economist who studies how the oil and gas industry affects the state budget.
So if you look in 2014, we had about 48,000 people employed in the oil and gas industry in Louisiana. And if you look to early 2016, we had lost about 14,000 of those jobs. And so that's about a 30% decline in that particular industry.
A drop in oil prices affects the state budget in a few ways. There are indirect effects that we see in income and sales tax revenues.
So when people are laid off, they're not earning income, or maybe they're in other jobs that they're not earning as much income as they were before. Therefore, they're not spending as much at grocery stores. They're not buying new vehicles. They're maybe not buying new houses.
There's a direct effect in severance tax. That's the money collected on product that comes out of the ground.
The severance tax rate, of course, is a function of the price that it's being sold for. And so when you have a decrease in both oil and gas prices, you see decreases in direct severance tax revenues because of that. Not only because of the decrease in the price, but also because people are producing less oil and gas, and therefore you have less revenues.
This caused a problem in the 1980s, when up to 40% of the state's tax dollars came from this line of revenue. But Louisiana has come a long way from the 80s bust.
When there was an oil bust, literally the state's budget could drop, double digits in terms of percentage points. After the 1980s, we really saw a structural shift that the state decided, look, we just can't depend on this volatile source of revenues for our main source of revenues.
Businessmen struggled in the 80s too. McKnight says his father and uncle were just getting the company off the ground when prices fell.
And they had to be able to do everything. They had to be able to take the orders, fill the orders. If any manufacturing had to be done, they had to be able to do that.
That taught them lessons that made their company stronger in 2015.
You don't carry a lot of debt. That's one of the things that my dad and his brother instilled in us, is to not get over your skis. And so we have been able to hold on to people longer and more people than we might have otherwise if we were in a high debt situation.
Upton says an oil and gas downturn can have a disastrous effect on a single year.
But don't be mistaken, we're not where we were in the 1980s, where every time there's a change in the oil price, it necessitates structural tax changes.
Upton says the problems in the modern-day state budget are bigger than a single year. He credits in part a tax reform plan passed in the early 2000s that was partially repealed half a decade later.
And if you look today, in terms of as a share of personal income in the state or as a share of gross state product, Louisiana citizens pay less taxes than they have in decades and decades. In terms of the structural issues that we've had in the state budget, are not due to the recent drop in oil price. Those have been sustained over the past decade. And I think the culprit for those is significant changes in the tax code and the inability of the legislature in order to match those revenues with those expenses.
But while lawmakers in Baton Rouge get their work done, or don't, businesses in Acadiana keep going.
As far as the oil price goes in the future, I do a good bit of reading. I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. I'm certainly not an expert, but we're going to prepare for the worst and hope for the best and show up every day and do our job to the very best we can.
Great thing to do there. Congressman Garrett Graves announced 2 weeks ago that $17 million is being budgeted for Corps of Engineers projects in the state. Among the 5 projects is the Comite River Diversion Canal, set to receive more than $6.5 million. The project was originally supposed to be finished about 5 years ago. So where does it stand today? Here's a look.
The Lily Bayou control structure in South Louisiana is supposed to slow down floodwaters diverted from the Comite River to the Mississippi River. Today, though, it sits dormant. It's the only part of the 12-mile Comite River Diversion Canal that's been built in the 25 years since the project was authorized.
The Comite River Diversion Canal project is a canal that will divert excess water or flood waters from the Comite River, which is a tributary of the Amite River, into the Mississippi River.
Dietmar Richier is executive director of the Amite River Basin Commission, or the ARBC. The floodplain management agency was created following the historic floods of 1983. That year, the Comite and Amite rivers overtopped their banks, causing $344 million in damage to the surrounding parishes.
So after the floods in 1983, there became a realization that we have to have some regional solution to the flooding problems. And that's how we were created by state statutes for that purpose.
Of 4 flood protection projects, the commission was only able to receive congressional approval for the 12-mile Comite River Diversion Canal in 1992. Work on the project began in earnest after voters in Ascension, East Baton Rouge, and Livingston parishes approved a tax to fund it in 2000.
We actually signed a cooperative agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers and the state of Louisiana, and East Baton Rouge Parish also as a partner, to start the construction. So it started basically in the year 2001.
The project was initially estimated to cost $153 million, but has increased to $245 million over time. 60% of funding comes from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which handles construction. 40% comes from the ARBC and the state to cover land acquisition and environmental mitigation costs. So far, over $117 million has been spent and just the Lily Bayou structure built.
Although we have been receiving federal funds almost on a yearly basis, it never has been sufficient in any given year to undertake the construction of any major feature, being a section of channel, being a bridge.
Although the project was authorized in 1992, the full amount of funding was never appropriated. Instead, money is given in bulk to the Corps each year, and they must divvy it out among competing projects nationwide based on a benefit-cost ratio. At the state level, Louisiana's 2017 capital outlay budget has $72 million dedicated to the project. But the last time the state committed funds to the project was fiscal year 2010.
This project's been on the books for 30 years. It's time to get it done. Let's get the money there, and I think we got a lot of people working to get that done.
Junior Shelton is mayor of Central. 75% of the city's property is in the 100-year flood zone.
The Comite and the Amite rivers are boundaries of the city of Central. So we've got citizens literally living on those rivers. Anything that happens in those rivers affects the city.
The 2016 flood affected 9,000 of Central's 11,000 residences. While a completed diversion canal would have minimally reduced the flood's impact, the event jump-started interest in the region.
This flood has presented the opportunity for other mayors such as myself, Mayor Landry from Denham Springs, Parish President Leighton Ricks, myself, to understand that we need to get together and get this thing done and make it happen for our citizens.
Valerie Hodges, a state representative from Denham Springs, unsuccessfully fought this session to move federal disaster recovery funds to the project. Her bill would have diverted $190 million from aid earmarked for homeowners. Richier is still optimistic that federal recovery dollars will make it to the project.
There is funds that have become available. They come through the Homeland Security, through Housing and Urban Development HUD. They are primarily what they call hazard mitigation monies. And there has been, in the last months, I say, an attempt to see how we could utilize some of these other funds.
The Corps stated that, if this project was fully funded, we could probably wrap this up in about 2.5 years or something in that ballpark.
Bobby Duplanche works for the Corps of Engineers and is senior project manager for the Diversion project.
The project is in the construction phase right now. We have ongoing design, we have ongoing surveys, and the next thing that we're targeting is the construction of the Highway 61 vehicular and railroad bridges.
Part of this will require relocating numerous pipelines, which is expensive. DOTD is reluctant to spend the money without assurances that the remaining work will be fully funded. More than 2 decades of inaction has also created an issue with the Comite and Amite rivers' carrying capacity.
If you've got water flowing into your city and you're trying to divert it and get it to the rivers, if the rivers are already built up, it can't take that much water. So there's a project going on now to determine how much it's silted up. We feel like they'll see that they'll have to dredge them and lower that river bottom.
A January status report on the Diversion Canal, prepared by the legislative auditor, suggests the legislature may wish to direct the Comite River Diversion Canal Task Force to evaluate the viability of this project, including whether or not it should be continued. Mayor Shelton says the canal should be built and voters need to speak out.
This is a project that counts, and they can make their voices heard. They can make things happen. It will get done, but it will start at home. The citizens have to speak out to their elected officials.
This flood story is supported by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Greg Guirard, Cajun crawfisherman, a Atchafalaya Basin photographer, author, actor, father, and keeper of the basin's magic, recently passed away. His contributions to our state's cultural landscape, though, will live on forever. LPB's producer, Tika Loden, and photographer Rex Fortenberry look back at time spent with Greg at his home on Bayou Amy near Catahoula.
There's some special feeling, and I don't know how to describe it exactly. You have to almost live it. It's a very unusual kind of connection. Almost like Native Americans and their feeling for the land. Is the Cajuns' connection with the big woods and the waters and the land. It's a strong thing. It's tranquility, lack of stress, physical beauty, environmental beauty, peace. It's a gentleness, I think, is a word I'd put in there too. Just a peaceful attitude toward life, I think. I don't know what you call it now. I was going to say it's not the culture, maybe it is. It's not the food, maybe it is. It's not the attitude toward life that I think is so healthy and energetic and enthusiastic, and maybe it is. It's all a combination of all those things, and it's the environment itself. You know, I can be out there, and I know I'm not making a living crawfishing. I'm probably losing money. I don't keep very good accounts because I don't want to know that I'm losing money, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to do it anyway. I'll be out crawfishing tomorrow morning at sunrise. And I'm hoping there's a beautiful sunrise so I can record it on film, and if there's not, I'll just start running my crawfish traps and be one of the happiest people I know. There you go. Why they grab like a snake? It's some kind of powerful draw. It's who I am, I guess.
And that's our show for this week. For everyone at Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow. Thanks for watching. Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Support for this program is provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation of Jennings. The Ziegler Museum is a cultural center for Southwest Louisiana, featuring European and American art and wildlife dioramas. Additional support provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.